What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the episode of Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Maylari. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about some NBA trade packages I created over the last couple weeks. I created some trade packages for James Harden, Anthony Davis, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine. Some of these trade packages are probably unlikely. I think each player has a different likelihood of being traded, so it's a little bit difficult to know whether or not they'll be moved. It's also tough to know what the trade market will be for certain players, since sometimes players don't really have great value because of their age or their contract, or maybe because of a decline in production. There's a lot of reasons for why a player could get traded and why they may not get traded. A lot of the time, these packages are tough to make since you really never know what a player's true trade value is. For one team that's a little bit more desperate than another, they may give up more players or more potential draft picks in a deal to get somebody than another team would. So it's tough to really gauge what a player is really worth in a trade. But I tried my best with some of these packages, and at the end of the day, some of them may be accurate for what a guy may be traded for, and then, maybe not. As I said, it might depend on the team that's trading for them. They might be a little bit more desperate than other teams and may want to overspend to get somebody. So let's start off with James Harden. I think there's a 50% chance he's traded, in my opinion. The Clippers are right now 8-21 with two big wins in a row over the Lakers and the Rockets. Overall, this season has been very disappointing, but they do have the talent to figure things out despite the rock-bottom start to begin the year. With all that being said, I still believe it may be best for this team to go in the direction of blowing it up in the event they can't turn things around. And even though these two wins in a row are great, they still have a lot of work to do to try to get back in the playoff mix. They are only 3.5 games back of the last play-in spot in the West, but even if you get that, you're probably facing Oklahoma City in the first round, and that would be difficult. So at the end of the day, if they can't turn things around, they can blow it up and recoup assets for Harden, Kawhi, and Ivica Zubac. A trade package I created for James Harden. One of them is with the Cleveland Cavaliers. In this trade, the Clippers would get Darius Garland, who has 2 years left after the season's over with $39.4 million as his average annual value, a 2026 second-round pick from Cleveland, and a 2027 second-round pick from Denver. And then in return, the Cavaliers would get James Harden, who has 1 year left after the season is over with, at $39.1 million AAV. In this deal, the Clippers would get a young player to build around in Garland, while Cleveland would get a big-time playmaker and a good scorer next to Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley. Mobley and Allen would be big-time lob threats with James Harden. Right now, Cleveland is 5-5 in the last 10 games. They're only 7th in the Eastern Conference, but they're only 2.5 games back of the Celtics for the 3 seed, so the East is pretty stacked. You're pretty close, with a lot of those teams being, separated by 2, 3, or 4 games. This Cavs team can't figure things out, but they still need more scoring and also need some health. Sam Merrill's been hurt. Max Strus has been hurt. Now Mobley's going to be out 2 to 4 weeks with a calf strain. They do need some health, and like I said, they need more scoring. They have the highest payroll in the NBA right now and are the only team in the NBA in the second apron. They're approaching a time of desperation, so that's why I feel like they could feel like their window is closing and may try to make a win-now move to go out and get James Harden, even if that does cost them Darius Garland. Moving on to another trade, this is with the Houston Rockets to send James Harden back to his former home. The Clippers would get Fred VanVleet, who has 1 more year left at $25 million for the 26-27 season. Jabari Smith Jr., after the 2025-2026 season ends, he has a 5-year, $122 million deal kicking in with the $24.4 million AAV. He is making $12.3 million in the 25-26 season, which is a bargain for a player that's been productive as he has this year. And then the only other player in this deal would be Jae'Sean Tate, who is an expiring contract with $2.2 million for the 25-26 season. In addition to that, the Clippers would get a 2026 second-round pick from Chicago, a 2026 Houston second-round pick, and a Memphis 2027 second-round pick. And then in exchange, the Rockets would get James Harden, who has 1 more full season under contract at $39.1 million. That is a player option, so teams may be a little bit wary of trading for James Harden, knowing that he can't opt out after the season is over with. In this deal, the Clippers would get a young player to develop in their rebuild in Jabari Smith Jr. that adds some draft capital, and then also a veteran in Fred VanVleet, who they could ship elsewhere when he's back from injury. Meanwhile, Houston would have a point guard to run their offense. James Harden would be dangerous with Alperen Sengun in the pick and roll. That would be a very fun offense to watch. I do think the Clippers would not make this move because I do think at the end of the day they'd want at least 1 first-round pick for James Harden. And in this deal, if you're getting Jabari Smith Jr. and Fred VanVleet, I'm not sure at the end of the day if you'd get first round in return. But like I said, every team has a different, price tag of what they would trade for a certain player. So there is a chance that, Houston may say, you know what, we will give a first-round pick to go out and get James Harden in this deal. Another team that I have making a trade for James Harden is the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Clippers would get Julius Randle, who has 2 years left at $30.8 million per year. Rob Dillingham, who has 2 more seasons at $6.5 million per year. Leonard Miller, who has 1 more year at $2.2 million per year. And then a 2032 Minnesota first-round pick swap. And then the Timberwolves would get James Harden, who has 1 year at $39.1 million left on his deal. In this trade, the Clippers would be adding 2 young players in Dillingham and Miller, who could hopefully develop on a rebuilding roster. Dillingham has been a little bit underwhelming to this point, but I do think he has the talent to figure things out. And then Leonard Miller, a former second-round pick of the San Antonio Spurs, is only 22 years old, really hasn't got too many opportunities in the NBA. He's averaging just 3.1 minutes per game in 39 games played over the last 3 seasons for the Wolves. I do think he has some talent. I think he can maybe figure things out and be a rotation player for a team at some point. Maybe if he got the opportunity to play for the Clippers in a rebuild, he could develop into a legitimate rotation player on an NBA team. And then the Clippers would also be adding a first-round pick swap to add to their rebuild. And then the headliner of this return for the Clippers is Julius Randle, who has played very well this season. He's been balling out. It would make sense for the Clippers if they got Julius Randle to move him at some point to get some assets back. His contract isn't that bad at $30.8 million considering the production he's had this year. I think a couple teams would trade for Julius Randle if the Clippers were to try to reroute him after landing him. The Clippers are in need of a good power forward, but if we are trading James Harden, we're rebuilding, so I would not expect Randle to stay around more than just the rest of this season. Meanwhile, this would be a big-time move for Minnesota, who desperately needs a point guard in their starting lineup that can score and play make, and James Harden is still a big-time player, so I think this could be a good landing spot for him. And then moving on to my last trade package for James Harden, and that is with the LA Clippers and the Atlanta Hawks. The Clippers would get Trae Young, who has 1 more year left at $45.9 million for the 26-27 season. The Clippers would also be adding a 2030 Atlanta second-round pick. In exchange, the Hawks would be getting James Harden, who has 1 year left at $39.1 million. Like I said, it's a player option, so some teams may be a little bit nervous to trade for him, knowing that he could opt out and leave in free agency. In this deal, the Hawks would also be getting Derrick Jones Jr., who has 1 more year left at $10 million. The Hawks are 13-10 on the year without Trae Young, and they're 2-6 with Trae on the floor, so they're somehow better with Trae Young out of the lineup than they are with him in the lineup. Trading for James Harden would put them in a better position to contend right now, in my opinion, and then you add Derrick Jones Jr., who would help them tremendously on the defensive end. The Clippers are rumored to be interested in Trae Young when he's a free agent after next season is over with, so I would not be shocked to see them make a trade for him and try to get younger and put him on the Clippers in a move for James Harden. Now moving on to Giannis Antetokounmpo, who I think has a 30% chance of being traded. The Bucks are struggling right now. They're 12-18 on the year, 2.5 games back of the last play-in spot in the East, which I did predict a bad season for Milwaukee. My predictions in the Eastern Conference this year have been pretty solid. I was wrong about Miami. I thought they would struggle a lot more than they have this year. They've looked really good. But I was right about Philly and Toronto being surprise teams, and I also thought Milwaukee would struggle. If the Bucks continue to struggle and Giannis continues to be unhappy with the way things are going, I do think they may at least entertain offers more and more over time. I'm not sure if they do want to trade Giannis. When you trade Giannis, you're not going to get as much back in return. When you trade a superstar at the caliber of Giannis Antetokounmpo, you never really get an equivalent amount of talent back. That's just the way it is when you trade a superstar and a big-time talent like Giannis. One trade I do have them making is with the San Antonio Spurs, and this is probably my favorite trade package I made for Giannis. The Spurs would be getting Giannis, who has 2 years left after the season is over with, for the 26 and 27, and then the 27 and 28 seasons, he would be making $54.1 million. In exchange, the Bucks would be getting Harrison Barnes, who's an expiring contract. He has $19 million for the season, and then he'll be a free agent after this year is over with. Keldon Johnson, who has 1 more year left at $17.5 million. Dylan Harper, who has 3 more years left at $12.3 million per season. A 2027 Atlanta first-round pick. A 2029 San Antonio Spurs first-round pick. A 2026 Utah Jazz second-round pick. A 2028 New Orleans Pelicans second-round pick. And a 2028 San Antonio Spurs second-round pick. In this deal, the Bucks would be getting financial flexibility, a ton of draft capital, and then a young star in Dylan Harper to build around, while the Spurs would strengthen their starting lineup for the next 2 seasons, a starting lineup that would feature the best big three in the NBA, in my opinion, and that would be De'Aaron Fox, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Victor Wembanyama. I think that team would be very tough to stop. Not sure if the Bucks will move Giannis, but in the event they do move him, I think this would be a good trade package for them to go and seek. Another team I see potentially landing Giannis is the Timberwolves, and that would be the Wolves getting Giannis, who has 2 years left at $54.1 million. The Bucks would be getting Julius Randle, who has 2 more seasons at $30.8 million per year. Rob Dillingham, who has 2 years left at $6.5 million. Naz Reid, who has 4 years left at $21.5 million per season. A 2028 Minnesota first-round pick, a 2032 Minnesota first-round pick swap, a 2026 second-round pick via either Denver or Golden State, and a 2027 second-round pick via Cleveland, alongside a 2030 second-round pick via the Memphis Grizzlies. In this deal, the Wolves would be getting Giannis and adding him into the starting lineup with Anthony Edwards. That would be an issue, I think, with spacing when you have Rudy Gobert and Giannis who can't shoot. But defensively, that would be a very tough team to stop in the paint. The Bucks would have draft capital to build around in this trade, a young talent in Dillingham who could hopefully break out at some point, and then Randall alongside Naz Reid, who they could potentially ship elsewhere if they wanted to add more draft assets as well. I think this would be a solid trade package for Giannis. We'll see if the Bucks would ever entertain it. But like I said, I don't expect them to trade him. I think it's unlikely that Giannis is traded. But I do think he's going to continue to get more unhappy with the way things are going. And at some point, they may say, you know what? It's not going to work right now holding Giannis. We might as well go and get some draft assets and some young players to build around in return. Another trade package I made was with the Warriors. The Warriors would be getting Giannis, and the Bucks would get Jimmy Butler, who has 1 more full season left at $54.1 million. They'd also get Brandon Pajemski, who has 1 more year left at $3.6 million. A 2026 Golden State first-round pick, a 2027 Golden State first-round pick swap, a 2028 Golden State first-round pick, and a 2031 Golden State first-round pick swap. The Warriors would strengthen their starting lineup by having Giannis next to Steph. This move by the Warriors would just try to maximize the last couple years that they have Steph Curry on the roster, and Steph is still a very productive player, and Giannis is still in his prime. I still think Giannis is the best player in the NBA, so when you can add him in the starting lineup next to Steph, they may go and try to take that chance and just hope things work out. Jimmy is still a good player, but he's not the same player he once was, it seems. Giannis, like I said, is still in his prime and unstoppable. The Bucks would do this deal because of all of the draft capital they're getting in return from Golden State. Golden State would just basically be giving every first-round pick they have remaining. I feel like in this trade, the Bucks would get Jimmy and then try to ship him elsewhere and commit to a full rebuild. And then the last trade package I made was with the Miami Heat. The Bucks would be getting Tyler Herro. He'd be going back to his home state of Wisconsin. Herro, who has 1 more year left at $31 million for next season. Andrew Wiggins, who has 1 more full season at $28.2 million, a 2026 first-round pick from Miami, a 2028 first-round pick swap from Miami, a 2029 Miami first-round pick. That would all be going to the Bucks, and then in exchange, the Heat would be getting Giannis. This deal would make less sense in Milwaukee because Giannis, I think, is worth more than just 2 first-round picks and a swap, even with Tyler Herro being included. For Miami, their starting lineup would be tough to stop, with Giannis down in the paint with Bam Adebayo, and then you'd also add in a very good talent in Norman Powell. That starting lineup would be tough to stop in the East. But I do think the Bucks, if they do trade Giannis, they're going to try to send him to the Western Conference. I don't think they'd want to send him to the East and have to face him at some point. Now moving on to the next player, and that's Anthony Davis, who I think has a 60% chance of being traded from the Dallas Mavericks. They just want a good enough offer and a team willing to give them whatever they're looking for, whether it's picks or financial flexibility. Anthony Davis, the experiment of having him in Dallas did not work out. Obviously, trading a superstar and Luka Doncic at 25 years old was a tough move to make. I do think, though, if Anthony Davis was healthy last year and Kyrie Irving stayed healthy, I think the Dallas Mavericks would have had a better showing at the end of last season. But obviously, with all the injuries they had, just things went downhill very quick for them. And that's why you obviously saw their former GM, Nico Harrison, get fired. At the end of the day, if Davis stayed healthy, maybe things would have been different. But the reality of the situation is, they traded their franchise superstar and a fan-favorite player for Anthony Davis, who is still a good player, but a player that's very injury-prone and was not 25 years old like Luka was in his prime. When this trade was made, Anthony Davis was 32 years old. He's right now turning 33 in March. So it was a tough trade to make and a trade that really went downhill right away. He got hurt pretty early on in Dallas. If the Mavericks do try to trade him, I do think they try to go for expiring contracts just to get out of his last 2 years at $54.1 million for the 2026-2027 season and the 27-28 season. And I also think they try to add whatever draft picks they can get in return for him. One trade I had made for them is with the Atlanta Hawks. The Mavericks would get Kristaps Porzingis, who is an expiring contract at $30.7 million. Porzingis may not even play the rest of the season. He's battling a health condition right now, but I do think the Mavericks would see an expiring contract as attractive in this deal. They'd also get Luke Kennard, another expiring contract at $11 million for the season. And then they'd also add Mohamed Gay, who is a 23-year-old power forward on the Atlanta Hawks, who has had a decent year as a reserve for the Hawks, averaging 16.5 minutes per game, averaging 5.5 points alongside 3.4 rebounds. He would be added in this deal at one more year left at $2.2 million on his contract. The Hawks would also be sending a 2029 Atlanta first-round pick swap, a 2029 Cleveland second-round pick, a 2030 Atlanta second-round pick, and a 2031 Atlanta second-round pick, which Houston has swap rights to. And then in exchange, the Hawks would get Anthony Davis, who has 2 years left at $54.1 million. In this deal, the Hawks would not be giving up that much. They do give up that first-round pick swap in 2029 alongside 3 other second-round picks. But they wouldn't be giving up that much if you look at what their current roster is constructed as. You'd be giving up a player in Porzingis who may be out for the rest of the season potentially. Hopefully he is back at some point. But like I said, he's battling a health condition, so there's uncertainty about his future. You also add in Luke Kennard, who is a reserve for them off the bench. He has played in many games this season, logging 28 games at 7 points per game, shooting 42% from 3. Good player, but an expiring contract. I think they'd be fine moving on from him. And then Mohamed Gay, like I mentioned, only has 1 year left on his contract. If you're getting Anthony Davis and he's healthy, this isn't that crazy of a trade package for them to put out. I could see the Hawks gambling on this year's roster and making a move like this. Yes, Anthony Davis has injury issues, but when he is on and he's healthy, he could still be a top 15 player in the NBA. In this deal, they're not giving up that much draft capital-wise. I think the biggest asset they're giving up is a 2029 first-round pick swap, which they may be reluctant to give up. I think maybe they may not even have to give him that up if Dallas's goal is really just to get financial flexibility and then add whatever draft capital they can get in return. I do think, though, when you look at Anthony Davis' talent, I know there's the injury issues, but I do think Anthony Davis should net more than just a 2029 first-round pick swap as the best draft asset. With that being said, Dallas would not mind this return, I don't think, since they would have major cap flexibility after Anthony Davis is off the books. Now moving on to my last 2 players, and that is Zach LaVine, who I think has a 70% chance of being traded. One deal I have is with the Warriors. The Warriors would get Zach LaVine, who has 1 more year left at $47.2 million for the 2026-2027 season. The Kings would be getting Jimmy Butler, who has 1 more year left at $54.1 million, a 2026 Golden State first-round pick, and a 2027 Golden State first-round pick swap. This deal would make sense for Sacramento since they would be happy with adding control over 2 picks for their rebuild, while also having the chance to maybe move Butler for future assets down the line. For Golden State, Zach LaVine would be a big-time boost to their offense. They potentially would love to add more scoring next to Steph Curry and another shooter, and in this deal, they'd be giving up Jimmy Butler and a first-round pick and a swap. I do think that's a lot now that I look at that trade. I think if they're going out and they're getting Zach LaVine, I think they'd only have to probably give up Butler in that 2026 first-round pick, and the Warriors could hold on to that 2027 first-round pick swap. So I'll take away that first-round pick swap and make it just Jimmy Butler and a 2026 first-round pick. Right now, with where the Warriors are at, I think having Zach LaVine next to Steph Curry would be better than having Jimmy Butler in that offense, so I think this move could make sense for them. Now, for the last player I'm going to talk about, that is DeMar DeRozan, who I think has an 85% chance of being traded. It's an easier contract to move than Zach LaVine, so that's why I think it's more likely they move on from him. The one deal I have them making is with the LA Clippers. This is if the Clippers decide to not do the wise thing by starting their rebuild right now. I could see them making a low-risk move for DeMar DeRozan, who could potentially bolster their second unit. Like I mentioned, the Clippers have won 2 games in a row, but they're going to be without Ivica Zubac for the next 3 weeks after he suffered an ankle sprain this past weekend against the LA Lakers. Brook Lopez now re-enters the rotation. I believe we'll see Yannick Niederhauser as well more at some point. He played some last night for the Clippers. I do think YKN can be a legitimate rotation player in the league. Still very young, has some raw talent that he needs to still develop, but has defensive upside and strong athleticism. I see star potential in his game. Whether or not he gets there, who knows? You never know with a young player, but I would like to see him get some more chances to shine and develop. I think he can be a good rotation player for this Clippers team. As I said before in my last episode, which was fixing the LA Clippers, I would not mortgage any more of the Clippers' future for this current team. I would hit the reset button right now if they continue to lose games. With that being said, like I said, they've already won 2 games in a row. So if they continue to win games, then it may make sense to keep the roster together. But at the end of the day, if they're 15-30 after 45 games into the season, it would make sense, in my opinion, to move on from this current roster and hit the reset button, get a head start on the rebuild, and plan to be competitive again in a year or two. This type of move of DeMar DeRozan is not a wild trade to make, though. He would still be on the books for another season like James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, but I don't think this would be a big-time, trade where the Clippers would be giving up too much. In this deal, the Clippers would get DeMar DeRozan, who has 1 more year left at $24.7 million for the 26-27 season, and then the Kings would get a 2026 Memphis second-round pick, which is a protected second-round pick, John Collins, who is an expiring contract at $26.5 million for this season, and then he'll be a free agent. The Kings would be getting financial flexibility in this deal, which an expiring contract is smart for the Kings with where they're currently at. For Sacramento, getting cap flexibility with DeRozan off the books and adding a second-round pick, I think they would see as a win. Meanwhile, the Clippers would get a player to try to bolster their offense and an all-time great scorer in DeMar DeRozan, who grew up in Compton, California. DeRozan would be the 3rd scorer on that team next to James Harden and Kawhi Leonard. And the Clippers would be getting a player in DeMar DeRozan to potentially try to replace what they thought they were going to get out of Bradley Beal to replace Norman Powell. Would see, I still am very high in DeRozan. I still think he's a very good player, and I do think DeMar DeRozan is a Hall of Famer. Whether or not he's still the same player he was 5 years ago, he's probably not that anymore, but he's still going to be a productive player and still give you 20 points any given night, which I think the Clippers would see as a valuable asset to this lineup. John Collins has been playing better as of late. Last night was very good for the Clippers in their win over the Houston Rockets. So I don't think they try to trade him right now. This is just if the Clippers want to make a low-risk move, and let's say in 5 games, if they go 1-4 in the next 5 games, they could maybe go out and trade John Collins in a low-risk move and get DeMar DeRozan. I'm not sure if that's the best move right now. I'm going to wait and see how things go. Like I said in my last episode, I think it may make the most sense for the Clippers to hit the reset button and rebuild right now. But at the end of the day, if they can go out and take a low-risk move and get DeMar DeRozan, I don't think that's the worst trade in the world. But I do think at some point, if things continue to go south for this team, it may be the best route for them to hit the reset button and rebuild right now and get some draft capital back in return. I'm going to try to stay optimistic, though. I was very down on this team, especially with the way they've been playing the last couple weeks. But there still is a lot of season left. We'll see how things go. Hopefully the Clippers continue to win some ball games. I'm still going to be watching them play no matter what at the end of the day. I'm still going to be supporting them. But if they continue to win some games and make things interesting, it would definitely be fun to watch. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody out there. Thank you for listening, as always. It's much appreciated. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you and take care.